When it comes to creating good sounding house music that works well in the club, there are some important decisions that you have to get right pretty early on in the composition phase. So let's look at a few examples of things that you might want to be on the lookout for pretty early on in your production to then have it easier to create a good mix later.
Rhythm, keep dancing.
In the last video, we kind of started a new house track from scratch, right? And what we came up with so far were these drums. Kind of nice, energetic and skippy. Then we had this housey chord step right here, where we also modulated the filter a bit. And we had some vocal steps.
Rhythm, keep dancing. Rhythm that you want.
So kind of cool. The next logical step would probably be to create a bass line, right? But this is a really crucial point in the production process because now you're really deciding the quality of the low end and how well it's going to sound in the club. And there are just a few boxes that you have to check and things that you have to look out for in order to make that happen. And since we're building everything on top of what we have so far, kind of makes sense to also analyze and question that at least a little bit, especially in the context of low end. So let's just do that as an example here. And let's start with a chord step. Of course, if we want to make a bass line for that, we have to know what note is playing. And with steps, sometimes you might not know that exactly. So I would get Voxengo span and check for the fundamental note of the chord step. So we're basically playing a C sharp and then jumping to a D sharp. And in frequencies, a C sharp is around 70 hertz. We see like 68 up here on the left. You can see the hertz number, which is fine. And then the D sharp is around like 75. So we already have quite a bit of low end energy or basically a bass note in our chord step. And that's important to keep in mind. If we then add something to there, if we want to layer something below or on top, it's kind of important to have this sound in mind right here. Then if we check out the kick, for example, might also make sense to know, okay, what is the kick playing frequency-wise? So let's look at that. So here we can see, all right, the kick is sitting relatively high. So it's nice and punchy. It's this classic 909, but you have this plateau from like 60 hertz to all the way up to 226. But then down here, like just above 40, between 40, 50, up to 60, that's where the heavy bass energy, the sub would be sitting, that really moves you in the club. And we don't have much energy there yet. So when we're picking a bass sound and picking also what notes the bass is going to be playing, it makes sense to keep that in mind. But even on top of that, we could question where the key sound is sitting, because I was just jamming it out. So I was pressing an F, which corresponds to a C sharp in the sample, but kind of this C sharp is sitting a bit awkwardly, because if we look at its span and we said, okay, it's sitting around 70 hertz, that's too high for a strong bass. But if we play this an octave lower, I'm just going to bring in a sub bass real quick so we can actually listen to that. So it's just a sub from my sample pack that you find on my website. So we were sitting on the C sharp right here, around 70. And now an octave lower, we're getting very low. And this could work out in some productions, but especially if you're not crazy advanced, I would stay away from going much below 40 hertz for your sub sounds and things like that, especially if you might want to have them play more constantly. So just by selecting where the chord step is sitting, we're already kind of deciding how the sub is going to work out. And in a way, if you want to have a sub that's sitting nicely between 40 and 50, that corresponds to a G, right? I already talked about this in some of my other videos, but here you're much safer. But for that, we might even have to switch the chord step up. So let's say we could either bring it up or down. If we bring this up 4 semitones.
Rhythm, keep dancing.
Sounds a bit high for my taste.
Rhythm, keep dancing.
This could even work, okay? Just something to keep in mind. But let's keep it the way it was and see maybe there's a way that we can work around that to still get nice sub energy. So we're right here. So now layering this with a sub like this one, Let's open up span again. It's a bit like, okay, that's a bit weird. So another move that you might make and say, okay, I want to EQ this out, so I actually have the space below here to put in a bass, right? So you might be, okay, I'm just going to use an EQ, filter out the low end, so I have space for the bass line. To play this instead. Something that I can recommend for chord stabs is that if there is a bass sound in there that you don't want to have, don't use an EQ once the chord is already being played. Probably you want to find this in the browser, create a new audio track, and drag this in here. EQ it. For example, right now we're sitting here. Let's just get a Pro Q2. And let's EQ it now quite steeply. And then record this. I'm just going to do that real quick. Now you have this without the bass. The reason I'm telling you that you might want to do that to get things under control is that later on, let's say we're playing a different chord rhythm with this. We're jumping around quite a bit. And what happens when we do that? Now with our EQ setting, these fundamental frequencies, the moment you pitch the chord up, for example, now they're coming through, and you would maybe later on have to control that all of a sudden the frequencies are present again. It could work out to balance things out, but in a way I feel like, okay, I want to work with the chord step the way I want it to sound, so I'm going to print it for one specific pitch, and then even if I pitch it around, it's going to have the same balance in a way. So 2 tips already. Make sure to be really careful about what pitches you're playing chord steps at, and if you have to EQ them quite drastically and maybe even take out a whole bass note, do that first, record it, and then use the newly bounced chord. Let's now see a trick to kind of say, okay, we do want to fill this last gap of energy that we had, right? So let's see here. Just having a sub might be a bit difficult. We could layer this very low note, but we're almost separated down here. So a move that you could do is obviously find the right sound with the right character and have some movement in there. And something that works out well is kind of a stair type of bass line, for example, where you have some higher notes, but then start walking down a little bit. So you're just briefly in that really low area. And what I picked here is another sound from my sample packs, because I realized, okay, if I just go for a normal analog bass, which is oftentimes really dense, has many harmonics, didn't really work out that well, but something like this, like an FM bass, kind of has a character that kind of pokes out a little bit. And if you then EQ the chord step, it can go together quite well. And especially, like, just as a reminder, different types of synthesis will have different harmonic structures. And this one, as you can see, it's kind of spread out. So you have a strong bass note and then some harmonics up here up top. So it comes through nicely, you can hear it, but it's not too overloading and getting too full. And as it's a bass line that's walking down, you can see, okay, we're also reaching a point. So let's put this in context, maybe with the EQ'd one.
Rhythm that you want.
Okay, so those were some tips to keep in mind once you progress your ideas and you want to start composing and put bass sounds in there, and it doesn't matter what elements, to kind of keep in mind that whatever you're picking now is going to dictate the frequency content which is going to be in your production. And it's always a bit difficult to kind of just switch out elements later on and try to fix things up, because you kind of decided everything based on what you had at this point. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one, where we're actually going to advance this idea and bring more musical stuff in there. So yeah, see you there.